So I picked this game up on Good Old Games because 1, it was an early 3D post-apocalyptic cyberpunk racing game, and 2, because it was called Pod, Planet of Death, and who can say no to that? The game released in '97 and was developed by then Ubisoft, 1 year before their hit Rainbow Six franchise. Apparently, it was somewhat of a cutting-edge game, being one of the first titles featuring something called the MMX feature set, which I never heard about, and came bundled with Intel Pentium 2 MMX processors at the time, so I imagine it may have been the introductory video game for many people just by being included with the CPU. It also received a multiplayer mode and even an expansion pack later, and almost got a Nintendo 64 port. Pretty cool stuff for the time, things we now take for granted, especially a game running on whatever brand CPU or GPU you have. But how is the game itself, you might ask? Well, it starts off ambitious, greeting you with a pre-rendered cinematic intro of a man explaining everything.
It'll be over soon. Everything will be gone and this place will be forgotten. It's too bad, really, because the whole thing started out so well. Io was one of the most successful new planets. It was colonized rapidly, industries developed, and people came from everywhere to take advantage of the work opportunities here. For years, we all prospered. It was like living on a new frontier. And then, it all came to a halt. An accident in one of the mines exposed some sort of virus. Press code. Pod. It's practically destroyed everything here. Everyone has left Io now, or at least almost everyone. A few of us stayed behind, some by choice, others because they had no choice. Our days are numbered, though. We're all doomed, all except for one person. There is one ship left. One of us will get away to safety. Pod is in the final stages of its destructive cycle. Planet Io and everyone left on it will die. To kill time, we've been using parts from abandoned factories and forgotten equipment to transform cars into superpowered vehicles and race them around the empty streets of Io. Today's races aren't like the others, though. Today, each driver is racing for his life. The winner will take that one remaining place in the last ship. The others? Well.
Now at that point I was sold, I was ready. I had so many questions and ideas of this world I was hoping would be answered by more cutscenes or just by racing through the environments. Boy was I wrong. Apart from the outro upon completing the game, you get nothing, and the tracks, which I'll get into more detail in a bit, have almost nothing to do with the story. Also, the music in this game is completely different, but that's to be expected from a trailer. But let's start in the menu. You're dropped into this brown, grungy, rusted metal plate with screws on it, which I absolutely love. Reminds me of another French 90s cyberpunk game, Omicron, The Nomad Soul by David Cage, even though it came out 2 years later. And it's the same pre-Matrix idea of a grimy future, and I love it. As in most games at the time, every single time you press a button, you'll hear the same sound effect over and over and over again, and this one is prominent. In the control settings, you can find some amazing rusted controller devices, which I thought was a nice touch. Now the rest of the settings are pretty limited. The game is limited to running at a fixed resolution and a preset of graphical options, or so I thought, because it turns out you can change the resolution, but with a keyboard shortcut, which I never heard about, and I found that in the manual. Difficulty changes the AI behavior, and there is two types of damage, global and local, meaning let's say you damage only the left side of your car, which is cool, but since your car isn't repaired between stages in a championship, I would only use it for single races. The rest of the menus are cumbersome to say the least, and you're flooded with information left and right, which I admit makes you feel like you're navigating a cyber terminal, but sadly doesn't make it less frustrating. The complete gold version of the game, according to the Good Old Game Store page, features 16 cars and a whopping 32 tracks, which sound amazing at first, but I'll explain in a bit. Let's start with the cars then. There's 8 in the base game and 8 DLC cars that they added later, and you can swap them around in the 8 slots the game gives you. DLC ones definitely look cooler than the boxy metal ones, and I did my playthrough with the original car roster because I wanted to experience the game the developers intended, and totally not because I only figured out how to swap them around after writing the script. Each of them handle differently and have unique attributes, but you can change the most of it in the tuning menu. Here you can redistribute points from, let's say, from the brakes to the acceleration, which is an interesting idea, and it gives the game more depth and replayability. Now let's talk about possibly the most important aspect of a racing game, the maps. The campaign is essentially doing a championship and winning overall, so I did just that. I chose the best handling car that's in the base game and started my journey. The first map is called Beltane. It looks like an abandoned mining town from the trailer, with some tight turns and long highway section. I think this map is a pretty good representation of the game. Keeps the immersion regarding the story intact, and it's actually fun, while still offering some challenge. I especially like the dark section, where you only see what's illuminated by the lights overhead. It's a really cool use of the tech available at the time, and it gives the illusion of real-time lighting. The next map is Rock, which immediately goes off the rails and into an alien moon base, abandoning the story where we're supposedly survivals, deserted on a planet, racing mining equipment. But other than that, it's a very solid map. It looks amazing, and it reminds me of some of the planets in Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. After that we have Nuke, a nuclear power plant, I suppose, that has been left to rust. This map has a very dramatic red skybox and some not so obvious turns, which is foreshadowing a very frustrating trend in this game's map design. After Nuke we have Bank, which looks like the supercomputer that runs the stock market in the future, bearing zero resemblance to any existing or fictional bank I've ever seen, and reaffirming my suspicion about the developers making stuff up as they went. It's a cool track though, with flowing turns and small jumps to keep it competitive. Next up is Pompeii, and apart from the weird naming, it's my favorite map of the base ones. It has a beautiful skybox, a nice vibe, and it's fun to drive. Also, it's easy to read and navigate, which, as I alluded to earlier, will become something we just can't take for granted with this game. After that we have Canyon, which is a very interesting and nice looking map, sporting an amazing orange and teal color combination with the rocks, the road and the sky. The layout is pretty nice and it's easy to follow, turns feel great, and the environment is quite varied. Following that we got Downtown. Now Downtown goes back to the style and visuals of the trailer, but also pranks you with dead ends if you don't pay attention. Now this you could write off as playful trolling from the developers, or you could feel like the game is punishing you for a small mistake. However you decide to feel about it, rusting city center of this map looks great, even if the layout is a bit frustrating, with turns being too tight at times. Leaving downtown, we have Wetland. Now this alien landscape looks amazing with its red, blue and white color scheme, but I immediately got pranked by its collapsed bridge and it took me like 3 laps to figure out where to go. The layout itself is okay for the most part, but some turns are just too tight even for the A1. Next we have Plant 21, a big rusty industrial complex with bright orange hazard signs, abandoned machinery, and the gnarliest speed check I've seen since Trackmania. Talking about punishing, if you don't have enough speed before the ramp, you will not make it and you have to do a lap of shame attempting the last couple corners again. Now the map itself actually looks very cool and I love the naturally boxed in nature of it, but that goddamn jump just made me lose all appreciation for this one as I tried to reclaim at least 1 or 2 positions from last place. After that we have City, a continuation of good looking but very confusing maps. Readability here is awful, there are no turn left here signs or traffic cones, you just gotta follow the AI or figure it out. Apart from being very frustrating and unfun to drive, the architecture of this richer part of the supposed megacity looks pretty cool. I always had a soft spot for low poly architecture, I just wish it wasn't ruined by a track layout that is a chore to drive. Now next up is Galleria, a true cyberpunk cityscape with advertisement, neons everywhere, and the game's trademark rust on every single surface. This track was tough, but in a good way. It didn't try to cheat me out of my first place. It was hard but fair. It was exciting to try to keep my first position as I blazed through these deserted streets of a once overpopulated city. Then we have Burrow. Possibly tying back to the story, maybe it's set on an asteroid full of alien flora. It's very thorny and biological and not exactly good looking or fun. Now as far as virtual tourism and escapism go, it must have been a trip to see this in the 90s with your still developing brain, but now it's just weird looking with way too many triangles. Leaving Burrow, we arrived at Alderaan, which to me sounds like Alderaan, the planet from Star Wars that gets blown up. This Alderaan is seemingly an outskirt area of the neighboring megacity, connects the industrial zone to the highway. It is also very difficult to navigate, and it tries to pull the same collapsed bridge trick on us. And holy shit, did you see that? A car just came out of the shortcut just like the trailer. Oh my god, 10 out of 10, moving on. Next is Sewer. Sewer, just out of nowhere, has a reflective surface and it looks amazing. While you're admiring those, it pranks you with a dead end and a layout impossible to understand at the first time or second. The visuals of this map are okay, is a cool beached rusting ship at one point and some toxic waste waterfalls, but it's impossible to appreciate any of this while you're constantly trying to keep track of where the hell you're supposed to be going. You may be noticing a trend here. Next up is Cocoon, and let me just say, what the fuck is this? We're on yet another asteroid, this time bug themed, racing our cars made of mining equipment to determine who gets to survive, and we decide to do all that in some dank moth cave. As you can probably tell, we're racing in the lair of some evil grasshoppers from A Bug's Life, even though that movie would only come out a year later. Gameplay wise, it's annoying and it looks weird and out of place. And finally, the last map of the base game, HQ. This looks like some police headquarters on a moon base. The white and blue complementing each other beautifully, it plays nice too with the roads having clear directions and readability. It reminds me of the moon map from LEGO Racers. After completing this track and winning the championship overall, you are rewarded with a cinematic outro. But the maps are not done, oh no, and so isn't my suffering, because next up is Aztec, and gotta say, that has to be the best and coolest edgy cyberpunk names I've ever heard. Unfortunately for me though, that's where the positives stop. The place itself looks amazing. It's a psychedelic black and yellow skybox and some cyber Aztec architecture, while the road itself is mostly carved into rocks as an artificial canyon. All of this super cool concept in theory, but there is obviously a bottomless pit of void where you fall off over and over and over again, a gnarly speed check prank jump where you're actually meant to slow down and not jump. And remember, this is the first DLC map that was supposed to give you a taste of what to come, but to be fair, there was nothing that could have prepared me for what was coming. Next is Lake. I like Lake for the most part. It's an oceanside complex with clear, wide, easy to navigate roads, some unnecessary jumps, and it looks great. Of course, it had to be ruined by the speed check jump, but other than that, it's cool. It also features some regional audio where the sound effect only plays as you approach a broken cable. Pretty cool stuff. After Lake, it's Loon. And oh my god, is it awful. I don't know what was this obsession game developers had back in the day with theme parks, carnivals, clowns and such. I remember 102 Dalmatians, Painkiller, Left 4 Dead, all having similar themed levels, just to name a few. I guess there are only so many widely recognizable themes you can have. It's either ancient Egypt, Mayan ruins, pirates, there's only so many. The casino part, however, I can only think of one game being obsessed with, and it's the one and only Sonic the Hedgehog. My guess is most video game companies wanted to stay away from the then more commonly association because the word gaming used to mean gambling and it was commonly understood that way. Anyway, apart from it being absolutely immersion breaking to race in a casino funfair hybrid, it's also horrible to race in. It is very easy to get lost even for the AI or miss a jump, and it just becomes frustrating after one lap. It also has a launch pad for some reason. Following that is Mine. It starts off with the camera collision going through the roof, and after that part there is a nice looking open area. After this, however, it becomes incredibly claustrophobic and hard to navigate again, even for the AI. Also, thanks to the super low ceiling, it messed up my camera in a way that most of what I saw was the rear of my own car and not where I was going. Well, now I know that I could have just changed the camera to the bonnet with a shortcut, but I only discovered that upon reading the manual after my playthrough while writing the script. Next is parking, and immediately you might notice the same problem with my camera. Now again, armed with the knowledge that I have now, I may have been able to adjust it, but it wouldn't have been able to salvage this map either. This one is a mess. It's a maze littered with random garbage, mostly abandoned quote-unquote cars and toxic goo things seeping from outside. The map doesn't look particularly amazing either, apart from the cool red skybox. Coming up after that is Pipeline. It was at this point I had enough and decided to mess with the camera and found them on the F keys. This map is cool. It looks like you're driving through a server, the brain of a neural network of a rogue AI. It also reminds me of the real-world parts of the Matrix. They also use the same light trick from before, but with less contrast this time, making the illusion less convincing. Now next map is Sky Race, a prime example of being too ambitious and experimental. This map features a launch pad for some reason, which you will miss the first time because there are no signs pointing to it. It also introduces slippery surfaces, which you have to figure it out on your own. I guess a barrel of leaking green sludge with a warning sign would have been helpful. In case you haven't figured out, it's the yellow painted parts of the road that are slippery for some reason, despite it not being the case in any other map. The rest is just random shit, weird skybox, awful colors and a terrible layout overall. Coupled with the intermittent loss of grip when driving on anything yellow, it's just awful. After that one came Special, and boy was it ever. It's a psychedelic castle in space made of rusting metal and red carpets. Straight out of that one scene in Labyrinth with David Bowie. It was a trip. At one point you drive through a mouth of a sculpture, which is peak early 3D shit. It even features some trademark toxic green goo just flowing randomly. The layout itself is okay, though kinda makes you feel like you're driving an RC car, which happened from time to time in this game. Moving on, it's Spin. It's a very cool looking track with nice colors, directional arrows finally. And of course that toxic green sludge everywhere. I almost liked this map until it pranked me with not one but two dead-end tunnels you can totally drive into, only to be told you're going the wrong way. Next is Vest. If Pipeline was the human computer's brains, this one is the alien one. It's like what we imagined cyberspace would look like, or what video games think a server park is. It's a cool concept and not too frustrating, even uses animated lights to tell you where to go. I have a suspicion that these were developed by different people with varying regards for directions in a video game. Next map is Z, which I gotta say has to be my second favorite cyberpunk names. It has neon green goo, which looks amazing, especially contrasting the grey tones of the wall and road. It has flickering lights and great illumination, tricking your brain once again into thinking it has real-time lighting. This map suddenly features the spilled goo I was talking about, and it makes sense why your car is suddenly slipping, though it only does that after you already drove through a whole river of the stuff. Overall, it's a great map, even if you fall into the middle section, it's not too punishing. And then there is Megapole, the bane of my existence. A concept that is in theory so my kind of shit, but in practice was the most frustrating experience I had in a video game in a long time. When I say it's a fucking maze, I mean it. Every goddamn corner looks the exact same. Some parts are just closed for no reason. The road you're meant to be taking is a sharp right and so on. It even has the slippery stuff from other maps, and this roundabout section this game keeps obsessing about. It was at this point I tried to salvage my sanity and distract myself with the ads scattered around this megacity. It even had a plane flyby, which is probably autonomous, since we're supposed to be the lost survivors here racing for our lives. Did it help? Maybe a little bit. But even on my fourth lap, I was struggling to find where I was supposed to go. Imagine being like 7 and playing this in 98. To say I was excited to move on and be done with Megapole would be an understatement. I just wanted my suffering to end, but it didn't. Enter Babblewab. Real cool name for a map, absolutely terrific to play. This map, what seems to be a derelict moon base, has slippery floors and bullshit everywhere. I think someone went into the INI files and turned the slippery up to 11 as a joke, and they left it in because the project manager said he liked it. It's terrible, awful, an absolute chore to play. And just like the background music, at this point I just gave up trying too. I just wanted to get it over with. They've done it. They made the video game so frustrating, instead of becoming challenging, it became a chore. The following map was Factory. It had cool flashing colored lights and confusing, frustrating layout, as you came to expect at this point. I was determined to finish the DLC championship, so I gathered my will and I tried to play it as if I was enjoying it. It had a highway looking section too, possibly connecting to the nearby megacity Megapole. Other than the nice teal skybox, it's very dull, brown and boring for the most part. The next map was Magnetic, an electrical transformer station, possibly responsible for providing power to the nearby city and factory. I was okay with this one, but then you're launched up in the air and become Sky Race all over again. They also have anti-air cannons for some reason and a very high resolution clock. Also a face for good measure. Next was the final map, Road 70, a map that I can only imagine is a wordplay on Route 66. It immediately of course makes you go the wrong direction for a whole minute in this wasp-themed hellscape, only to let you fall into a pit right after that. I appreciated how even the AI got tricked. At that point I was done, and to be honest, I still don't feel like replaying any of those maps. There's something about them that is very punishing but only slightly rewarding that made me just Alt F4 out of it and be done for that day. I did come back to this game, however, because I was captivated by its barely fleshed out world that they created and I wanted to learn its secrets. So I went back, scrubbed through the footage for any ads or signs, grabbed a screenshot, corrected the perspective and ran it through Gigapixel AI to be upscaled. Now due to the already low resolution and high compression of these images, it was having a hard time, but we can at least see what was going on. I did the same thing with some shots from the pre-rendered movies too. After that, I decided to generate some AI art inspired by this game, just to give us an idea what it could have been. First, I used text prompts inspired by the concept of the game and just the outrageous title. They came up pretty nice and interesting, if a bit generic. For this one, I typed Planet of Death concept art. It came out pretty neat, but it looks a little too much like Dune, even down to the weird aircrafts they have. For some of them, I said Alien Sand Planet concept art. For these ones, I changed the aspect ratio towards more landscape, and I asked for 90s sci-fi dead alien sand planet bleak cyberpunk desaturated concept art. It came out a bit Star Warsy maybe, because of the floating droid I guess. Here I specified brown and orange, hoping to get a muddy color grading, but I got these cool 70s sci-fi lines instead. For some of these I changed it up a bit, using the prompt 90s sci-fi abandoned mining planet dark sad bleak cyberpunk desaturated gritty grunge concept art wide angle brown color grading. They remind me a bit of Nier Automata and the first area in that game. And finally I just tried to explain the premise, saying stuff like rusty futuristic boxy looking race cars on an abandoned highway and stuff. After that, I went and tried to make the AI reinterpret stills from the intro and outro video and generate more modern looking ones. I used the image to image function with the image interrogation and hand fixing the prompts and a lot of trial and error.
For years, we all prospered. It was like living on a new frontier. And then, it all came to a halt. An accident in one of the mines exposed some sort of virus.
Next up, I went and used the same technique to interpret the advertising from the game, which came out very interesting. Now, a couple of things I didn't mention. This game has a community patch to make it run on modern hardware, which you can find in the Get Support part if you own the game on Good Old Games. There's also a guy who has an extensive guide on the game and a YouTube channel featuring seemingly every car and map combination you can think of. His site is even featured in the game's Wikipedia article. So from what I can gather, this game had a small but dedicated following at the time it came out, and I can totally see it. It's an addicting, well-made game that for many may have came bundled with the computer that your dad purchased and you had no convincing to do, and it would have been tough getting your parents to buy something that has death in the title. In conclusion then, Pod Planet of Death is a very interesting game with a solid foundation. Charming early 3D graphics and a huge amount of maps, though most of the DLC ones you have to memorize to enjoy. Overall, it's a fun racing game with a surprising amount of depth, especially considering the cartooning functionality. Compared to like a kart racer, it's way more fleshed out and even had online multiplayer in 1997. So I would say, if you're into this kind of stuff, it's definitely worth checking out, especially if it's on sale. Now, thank you very much for watching, press all the buttons below, and hopefully I will see you again.